Back again YouTube for our next video within this PHP framework series that we're building, and I want to actually just show you what we did on the last video where we sort of like built out some of our base classes. And I've actually went ahead and I put some metadata on the methods. I've not changed any of the code, so don't worry about it. I've just added some metadata and I've pushed this to Git. So this latest version of what we've done so far is now available on GitHub. So this video is going to be, we're going to cover our next section within this project, and I'm going to take you to this website. And if you're a self-taught developer, you'd have come across this website in your journey, and it's w3schools.com. It's a website that I used back in the days quite a lot, and I still use it to this day to reference certain things that I'm doing. And you can see on my screen I've got PHP globals, very contentious part of PHP, because depending on who you're speaking to, they would tell you to run a mile from PHP globals. And you know, back in the days when we used to build application, we used to use globals. You set a key, you assign it some context, and you can use it throughout the entire scope of your PHP script. And some of the problem that people add with globals is that it becomes very convoluted. You know, you're sort of like using them everywhere, and you sort of like naming them the same, and it's cool, you know, and it causes conflicts here and there. But I always like using them because I'm coming from procedural coding. Now I'm doing OOP. So we used to use global quite a lot to pass information from page to page, to function, and if you use them properly, they're a good little bit of asset to have within your project. And this is purely experimental that I've put it in my project, and I'm just sort of like, I've put it in and I want to see how it goes. But I have not done it the same way we've done it back in the past in a procedural way. I've actually wrapped it in a class, and we're going to use it a little bit differently. So if you look at what basic premise of this superglobal is, it says superglobal is a PHP superglobal variable which is used to access global variables from anywhere in your PHP script, also from within your functions or methods. PHP stores all global variables in an array, an index, and the index O, the name of the variable. So you could effectively, you know, store some context within a key, and you could use that wherever you want within your entire script. And again, I'm going to use it as an experiment just to see how it goes within this project, because we don't really need it to use it, but it's just something that I've implemented in, and it works fine for me how I was using it. And I guess I just want to show you guys how I'm using it within this project. But note that the project doesn't actually rely on globals. We're just sort of like messing about with it a little bit within this project, and we might leave it, we might not, but I'm going to actually go ahead and implement it, and it's going to be the simplest implementation, well, throughout this entire project, because again, I'm going to use an interface, and I'm going to implement that within a class. So I'm going to go back to my editor screen, and I'm going to close out of that. I'm going to create a new directory actually within this Magma core directory. I'm going to call it Global Manager. Yep. Within that, I'm going to create a couple of files. I'm going to call it Global Manager interface.php and global manager.php. And like what we've been doing before with designing by interface, so you should know the process by now. The PHP declare strict types. And if you've been following the series, you would notice that this is exactly how we go about implementing all of our classes. We start off with the declare strict types at the very top, then the namespace, then interface our class depending on what we actually implementing. So we're going to say equal true, namespace, it's going to be Magma, and we're now within that global manager directory. And say it's not class, it's an interface, and call it global manager interface. And it's going to be very simple, and it's going to contain two methods, and I'm going to actually set the metadata for these as we go. So the first one is going to be set global variable. It's be a public function. This is going to be set. That's the name of the method, set. And it's going to be void, and it's going to contain two arguments. It's going to be string. I'm going to call that key, and the second argument is going to be the value. And again, there's no data type because it could be any value, right? And let's just name these params, string, key, param, and it's going to be mixed value, right? And it's going to return void. Second method is going to be get the value of the set global variable. It's be public function get, right? And again, we're not going to set a return type because it could return any value, integer, array, whatever is it, whatever context that we set, we're going to return that. So we're not going to set a return type for this method. And I'm going to say key. Actually, I'm going to say string key. Parameter, which is a string. It's going to key. And the return type is going to be mixed. And I think when PHP 8 comes out, we'll be able to do something like this. I think. Don't quote me on that one, but I think we'll be able to do something like that. But for the time being, we're going to get an error if we leave it that way. So that's as simple as it gets for this particular interface. Two methods. Let's come to our global manager class and let's start writing that out. The PHP declare strict types, namespace, and it's going to be Magma and global manager. The class global manager, and we're going to implement that interface. And let me bring it in. And note that I don't actually need to bring it in because we're in the same directory. We can get away with leaving it like that, but I want to be explicit. So I'm going to say Magma global manager and bring that interface class in, or that interface in. Now, this class has not got a constructor. We don't need a constructor because we're going to reference these methods as static, right? We're going to declare them as static methods. So the first one I'm going to set is public static function. Call it set. And remember, that's got two arguments: the string, which is key, and the value. And I think set void. And all we're going to do is going to say globals key should be lowercase. I'm going to equal that to the value. right? So whatever key we set, we can retrieve that value using that key. That's the first part of it. The second method is that get method. I'm going to declare a static function get, and we're going to wrap this into a try catch block, catch any exception. Oops. I'm going to say return and globals get that key, which we need to pass in as an argument. So this will be a string key. Put a semicolon right here, and we're going to say there's a throwable then we're going to throw our own exception, which is going to be throw new global manager exception. Yep. And we're going to assign a message that says an exception was thrown trying to retrieve the data. Yeah, something generic like that. And let's bring that throwable in and that exception as well. So we're going to say magma, and we've not created that exception yet. Global manager exception. It's going to be global manager exception. And let's actually create that. Create a new folder like what we've been doing so far, trying to keep it consistent. File name global manager exception .php. Let's just build that out. Magma global manager, and it's in that exception directory. I want to extend that base exception, and that's coming from this directory, right? So what we're going to do eventually is that all of our exception going to be living within this base exception, and we're going to extend from there. So we haven't got that base exception class yet, so I'm going to create it. I'm going to call it base exception.php. Let's quickly just copy this out, paste that in. Exception base exception. And again, we're going to come back to these and we're going to actually fix them up properly, so we actually got data that we can, or we're going to be manipulating the constructor in some of our implementation and passing in custom messages. But again, that's going to be a video within itself that we're going to be covering at a later date. So I'm going to close that file for now, and I'm going to bring it into this class. So I'm going to use magma base exception, and it's going to be that base exception class, right? And where are we? Yeah. So I'm going to close that for now. We've already got that in. I'm going to bring in the throwable, so that error goes, and we're returning whatever key we've set, or returning the context of that key. and I want to implement a third method. It's going to be a private method because it's only going to be used within this class. It'll be a private static function, and it's going to call is global valid, and that takes one argument, which is the key. So we're checking that we've actually got a valid key before we do any sort of return, and that's going to be a void method because it's got no return type. We're just sort of checking and throw an exception if a key is not valid. So I'm going to say if isn't set globals key throw new global manager. I mean, we could say we could use invalid because that would be the right exception to use in this scenario. Invalid argument exception, and we could say pass a custom message in saying invalid global key, right? So please ensure. We're making this up as we go along, guys, so bear with me for 1 minute. Ensure you have set the global state for that key that you're trying to check. We're going to do our next one. Say if empty key, gonna throw a next exception. And let's just copy this and paste it in. I'm gonna say argument cannot be empty, something generic like that, right? So we're checking if we've got a valid key, and we're also checking that that key is not empty. So in this method at top, in this get method, we're going to actually run this is global valid method. I'm going to say self is global valid. I'm going to pass that key in, so it will run that check at the very start of the function and check that we've got a valid key and it's not empty before executing any code. Alright, and let's just populate these with some description, which it's not doing. So let's go back over here, let's get these, copy, paste it in, take that out, to inherit it from the doc, and copy that, paste it there. We've got next argument, it's going to be param, it's going to be mixed value, and that's returning void. And let's give this a description. We check if we have a valid key and it's not empty, else throw an exception. Let's say param, which is a string, key, and it returns void, and it throws this exception right here. Just copy it, paste it, and we need to create this exception as well. It's a new file, paste that in .php, declare strict types equal 1 namespace magma, and it's in that global managers directory. and in that exception directory. The class, paste that in, and we're going to be extending from invalid, or as I said, we're going to be using our base class to do all of these exception, and this needs to be in this class. Yep. Let's create a next one and say base invalid argument exception .php. Let's just quickly create that. Declare strict equal 1 namespace magma base exception the class base invalid. Come on, keyboard. Invalid argument exception. Or maybe it's my typing. Or maybe I've got bad typing. Maybe that's what it is. Base invalid argument exception, which extends PHP invalid argument exception. And we're going to bring that in. Be like that. And wherever we've got these exception classes, we're going to go and fix them and basically call them from this base class. But again, that's going to be in a video by itself. So let's close that out. And that's a base invalid exception class, which we're going to be using throughout our core framework. Instead of referencing PHP exception directly within those classes, we're going to keep them in one place and then reference our own extension of those extended class, if you get what I'm saying. Right, so class global invalid argument exception, and we're going to extend that base invalid argument exception. Right, I'll need to bring that base class in. So I'm going to use base. I'm going to use magma. Base exception to be base invalid exception, like that. So that's our global manager invalid argument exception, and we need to bring it in this class. Use magma global exception. It's going to be global manager invalid argument exception, which is going to take care of this class right here. And that's as simple as it gets, guys. That's it. That's it for a global class. There's nothing else to it. There's nothing more to it. It's just as simple. That's as simple as it gets. And the idea behind this is that we're not diluting our application with global calls. We've got a wrapper class which essentially just wraps around that method or wraps around that PHP global, and then allows us to use it properly within our framework without, again, it's contentious. You might not like that implementation, but I'm going to use it because I think it's a handy little bit of function to use. Again, it won't be sort of like everywhere within our framework. It's just going to be used, I think, only in 2 parts of our application. And again, you're going to see how we're doing that. Right, so we've created an interface which contains 2 methods, a set and a get, right? Then we've implemented that interface and we've populated those methods with what you can see on your screen. And that's it. We've added some exceptions which extends the base exceptions, right? So we're going to actually push this to GitHub. I'm going to say git status, say git add and git commit, and added messaging, say added global manager class or component to core framework. I'm going to push that, so it's going to be git push origin master. So effectively we should now have that on our git, so we can actually check that. If I bring my browser back up again, we can go to GitHub, we can check the project, and there we go, we've got our global managers directory, and within that contains our files that we've just created. A very simple implementation of how we can manage our globals if we use them for our application. And that's what it is more for than anything else, is to manage it, so we're not having them all over the application and causing conflicts. We're easily able to manage it by having it within a class like this. And again, a simple interface that contains two methods: exceptions Yep, so that's it, guys. Again, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. In the next video, we're going to actually use this component to build our Flash messages with sessions as well.